The radio crackled to life at 3:47 hours, cutting through the pre-dawn silence of Bagram Air Base like a blade through flesh. Any station, this is Wolfpack Actual. We have 381 souls in the wire, taking heavy fire from all sides. Request immediate close air support, over. The voice was steady, professional, but beneath the military composure lay something else, desperation masked by training. Captain Zara Reaper, Akaffer, was halfway through her morning coffee when the call came through the squadron ready room speakers. Around her, pilots looked up from their flight manuals and pre-flight checklists, the casual morning banter dying instantly. 381 souls. In military parlance, that meant people, American service members trapped somewhere in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, with death closing in from every direction. The mission board had been updated twice already that morning, red pins marking known enemy positions across the Kunar province like a constellation of violence. But this was different. This wasn't a planned operation gone sideways or a routine patrol that had stumbled into trouble. This was a full-scale disaster unfolding in real time, and everyone in the room knew it. Reaper set down her coffee with deliberate precision, her dark eyes fixed on the radio as if she could see through the static to the men and women who had just signed what might be their own death warrant by breaking radio silence. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most skilled A-10 pilots in the 354th Expeditionary Fighter Squadron. But reputation meant little when politics and protocol stood in the way of action. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately known as the Warthog, squatted on the tarmac outside like a predator waiting to hunt. Its titanium bathtub cockpit and massive GAU-8 cannon made it the perfect close air support aircraft, designed specifically for the kind of danger-close missions that separated the living from the dead. But perfect aircraft meant nothing without clearance to fly, and clearance meant navigating a labyrinth of command structures that moved at the speed of bureaucracy, while people died at the speed of bullets. The radio fell silent. In that silence, Reaper heard something that made her jaw tighten, the sound of 381 heartbeats that might never see another sunrise if someone didn't act. She had joined the Air Force to save lives, not to sit in ready rooms while heroes died waiting for permission to be rescued. Her hand moved instinctively toward her flight helmet, fingers tracing the painted Reaper's scythe that had earned her the callsign she wore like armor. Outside, the Afghan sun was beginning to paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Beautiful country, deadly circumstances. Somewhere in those peaks, American warriors were counting ammunition and saying prayers, waiting for salvation that might never come. The morning briefing hadn't mentioned anything about a large-scale operation in Kunar province. That meant this was either highly classified or completely unplanned. Neither option boded well for a quick rescue. Colonel Marcus Hendricks, the squadron commander, burst through the ready room doors with the kind of urgency that made seasoned pilots reach for their gear without being told. His weathered face, carved by 2 decades of military service and 3 combat deployments, bore the expression of a man who had just received news that would define careers and end lives. "Listen up, people," he barked, his voice cutting through the tension like artillery fire. "We have a situation developing in the Korangal Valley. A joint special operations task force has been compromised during what was supposed to be a routine extraction. Enemy forces have them pinned down in a kill box approximately 15 clicks northeast of Firebase Phoenix." The room erupted in controlled chaos as pilots grabbed tablets, pulling up digital maps and satellite imagery of the area. Reaper's fingers flew across her screen, zooming in on the terrain that would soon become either a rescue zone or a graveyard. The Korangal Valley, known to every service member in Afghanistan as the Valley of Death, stretched across the screen like a wound in the earth. Steep ridgelines provided perfect cover for enemy fighters, while the valley floor offered nowhere to hide from the crossfire that could come from any direction. "Sir, what's the enemy strength estimate?" called out Captain Jake "Viper" Morrison, one of the squadron's senior pilots and Reaper's frequent wingman. His question hung in the air like smoke from a flare, marking the invisible line between a difficult mission and a suicide run. Hendricks consulted his tablet, his expression growing more grim with each swipe. Initial reports suggest we're looking at battalion-sized elements, possibly reinforced with foreign fighters. They've got the high ground, they've got time to prepare, and they know exactly where our people are. He paused, letting the implications sink in. The task force went in expecting light resistance for a high-value target extraction. Instead, they walked into what appears to be a carefully orchestrated ambush. Reaper felt her stomach tighten as she studied the topographical data. The landing zone was situated at the bottom of a natural amphitheater, with enemy positions commanding overlapping fields of fire from three sides. It was the kind of tactical nightmare that military academies used as case studies in what not to do, except this time it was real people trapped in the theoretical kill zone. "What about extraction assets?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing dread in her chest. "Surely we've got birds inbound for pickup." The colonel's silence said more than any briefing ever could. The weight of that silence settled over the ready room like smoke from a funeral pyre. Reaper watched her commanding officer's face, reading the micro-expressions that came from years of delivering bad news to people who deserved better. In the military, silence usually meant one of two things. Either the information was too classified to share, or the news was too terrible to say out loud. Given the circumstances, she suspected it was both. "The nearest extraction assets are currently committed to another operation," Hendricks finally said, his words carrying the careful weight of diplomatic language that meant someone, somewhere, had made a decision that prioritized some lives over others. "Estimated time to availability is 6 to 8 hours, assuming current operations conclude successfully." 6 to 8 hours. Reaper's mind immediately began calculating ammunition expenditure rates, casualty evacuation timelines, and the simple mathematics of survival under sustained enemy fire. 381 people didn't have 6 to 8 hours. They probably didn't have 6 to 8 minutes if the enemy forces were as well-positioned and numerous as intelligence suggested. "Sir, with respect," she said, standing from her chair with the kind of measured movement that suggested barely controlled urgency. "Our people won't last that long. Not against battalion-sized elements with prepared positions and clear fields of fire. They need close air support, and they need it now." Morrison nodded in agreement, his usual cocky demeanor replaced by the serious professionalism that emerged whenever the stakes were measured in American lives. "Reaper's right, Colonel. The A-10s are perfect for this kind of mission. We can be airborne in 20 minutes and on station in 40. That's a hell of a lot better than 6 to 8 hours. Hendricks ran a hand through his graying hair, the gesture revealing the impossible position he found himself in. As a squadron commander, his primary responsibility was to his pilots and aircraft. But as a soldier, his duty was to every American service member fighting in the mountains of Afghanistan. The two responsibilities didn't always align neatly, and today they seemed to be pulling in opposite directions with the force of tectonic plates. "The operation hasn't been cleared through appropriate channels," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "We don't have authorization for immediate deployment, and the airspace hasn't been deconflicted. There are procedures, protocols that exist for good reasons." Reaper felt something cold and sharp settle in her stomach as she realized what he was really saying. Somewhere in the vast machinery of military bureaucracy, forms needed to be filled out, approvals needed to be obtained, and boxes needed to be checked while people died. The radio crackled again, cutting through the bureaucratic discussion like a chainsaw through silk. Any station, this is Wolfpack Actual. Casualties are mounting. We are taking effective fire from multiple directions. How copy, over?" Every pilot in the room turned toward the speakers, and in that moment, Reaper made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She was done waiting for permission to do what she had trained her entire adult life to do. The A-10 outside wasn't just an aircraft. It was a lifeline, and 381 people were drowning while she sat in a briefing room discussing protocols. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor seemed unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Reaper stood with the kind of fluid motion that spoke to years of combat readiness training, her hand already reaching for the flight helmet that bore the Grim Reaper's scythe. She had earned through 2 previous deployments and more close air support missions than she cared to count. Around her, the other pilots watched with a mixture of admiration and concern, recognizing the look of someone who had crossed an invisible line from following orders to following conscience. "Captain Akafor," Colonel Hendricks said, his voice carrying both warning and understanding, "I need you to think very carefully about your next words and your next actions." She turned to face him, her dark eyes reflecting the kind of calm that came from absolute certainty. In her peripheral vision, she could see Morrison slowly rising from his own chair, his hand moving toward his gear with the deliberate motion of someone making the same impossible calculation she had just completed. Good. She would need a wingman for what she was about to propose, and there was no one she trusted more in the cockpit than Viper. "Sir, with all due respect," she began, her voice carrying the kind of steady authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with moral conviction. "There are 381 American service members who are about to die because we're worried about paperwork. I've flown 67 combat missions in this theater, and I've never lost a soldier under my protection. I'm not starting today." The ready room fell silent except for the steady hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of aircraft engines warming up somewhere on the flight line. Every person in the room understood that they were witnessing one of those moments that would be discussed in bars and ready rooms for years to come. The moment when someone decided that doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing. "The airspace isn't deconflicted," Hendricks said, but his tone had shifted from commanding officer to concerned mentor. "You could be flying into a surface-to-air missile environment without proper intelligence support. The enemy might have shoulder-fired weapons, and we don't have current positions on all friendly forces. This could be a disaster." Reaper nodded, acknowledging the risks while simultaneously dismissing them as secondary concerns. "It could be, but leaving them to die is definitely a disaster. Sir, I've studied the terrain. I know that valley, I know my aircraft, and I know my capabilities. Give me 20 minutes to generate sorties and I'll give you a miracle." Morrison stepped up beside her, his presence a solid reassurance that she wouldn't be flying into hell alone. "Make that 2 miracles, Colonel. I'm not letting Reaper have all the fun." The colonel looked between them, seeing not insubordination, but the kind of warrior spirit that had built the finest air force in the world. Outside, the morning sun continued its relentless climb into the Afghan sky, marking time in a way that seemed almost cruel given the circumstances. Each minute that passed meant more casualties, more families that would receive folded flags instead of homecoming embraces. Reaper could feel the weight of those passing seconds like physical pressure against her chest, making it difficult to breathe while standing still. The radio broke the silence once more, and this time the voice carried a new edge, the kind of controlled panic that came from watching good people die while help remained frustratingly out of reach. "Wolfpack actual to any station, we are taking heavy casualties. Request immediate close air support. We are marking our position with infrared strobes. Please acknowledge, over." Infrared strobes. That meant they were running out of other options for marking their position, probably because their other signaling devices had been damaged or destroyed in the fighting. It also meant they were desperate enough to risk giving away their exact location to any enemy forces equipped with night vision devices. Desperation was a luxury that soldiers rarely allowed themselves, which made its presence in the radio call all the more ominous. Colonel Hendricks closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, Reaper saw something that looked like resignation mixed with pride. He was a career officer who had reached his position by following rules and maintaining order. But he was also a soldier who understood that sometimes the right decision and the correct decision were two different things. "Captain Akafer, Captain Morrison," he said formally, his words carrying the weight of both authorization and farewell. "You are cleared to generate immediate combat air patrol over the Korangal Valley. Your mission is to provide close air support to American forces in contact with enemy combatants. Rules of engagement are weapons-free for any hostile forces engaging our personnel." The room erupted in controlled motion as the two pilots grabbed their gear and headed for the door. Reaper paused at the threshold, looking back at her commanding officer with something that might have been gratitude or apology. She wasn't entirely sure which. "Sir," she said quietly, "if this goes sideways—" "It won't," he interrupted, his voice carrying absolute confidence that she wasn't sure he actually felt. "You're the best close air support pilot I've ever seen, Reaper. Trust your training, trust your aircraft, and bring our people home." She nodded once, then turned and ran toward the flight line where her A-10 waited like a sleeping dragon. Behind her, she could hear Morrison's boots pounding the tarmac in perfect synchronization with her own. They had trained for this moment their entire careers, but no amount of training could prepare someone for the weight of knowing that 381 lives depended on their ability to thread the needle between heroism and disaster. The pre-flight inspection that normally took 30 minutes was compressed into 8 minutes of efficient, practiced movements. Every control surface, every weapon system, every critical component checked with the kind of focused intensity that came from knowing there would be no second chances. The A-10's GAU-8 cannon, capable of firing 70 rounds per second of depleted uranium ammunition, represented the difference between life and death for the soldiers trapped in the valley below. As Reaper strapped herself into the titanium bathtub that would protect her from ground fire, she thought about the call sign that had followed her through 3 years of combat operations. Reaper wasn't just a reference to the grim Reaper of Death. It was recognition of her ability to harvest enemy combatants with surgical precision while keeping friendly forces safe. Today, that reputation would either be cemented in legend or destroyed in the mountains of Afghanistan. The tower's voice crackled through her headset as she completed her engine start procedures. "Reaper 11, you are cleared for immediate departure, runway 09er. Good luck and bring them home." She pushed the throttles forward, feeling the familiar surge of power as the twin turbofan engines responded to her commands. The A-10 began its roll down the runway, gradually building speed, until the moment when physics surrendered to engineering, and the aircraft lifted off into the morning sky. Below, Bagram Air Base fell away like a memory, replaced by the harsh beauty of the Afghan landscape stretching endlessly toward the horizon. "Reaper 11 is airborne," she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Time to target, 37 minutes. Morrison's voice came through the radio a moment later. "Viper 1-2 is airborne and in trail. Let's go save some lives." As they climbed toward their cruising altitude, Reaper found herself thinking about the 381 souls waiting for salvation in a valley that had claimed so many lives before. She didn't know their names, their faces, or their stories, but she knew they were Americans in trouble, and that was enough. The A-10 beneath her responded to every control input with the kind of mechanical precision that had made it legendary among ground forces worldwide. Today, that precision would mean the difference between a rescue and a massacre. The flight to the Korangal Valley passed with agonizing slowness despite the A-10's respectable cruising speed. Every minute felt like an hour as Reaper imagined the battle unfolding below the clouds, American soldiers fighting and dying, while she flew through empty sky toward their position. The radio remained frustratingly silent. No updates from the ground, no additional intelligence from higher headquarters, just the steady drone of engines and the whisper of wind over control surfaces. Morrison held perfect formation off her right wing, his aircraft a reassuring presence in the vast emptiness of the Afghan sky. They had flown together dozens of times, developing the kind of wordless communication that kept pilots alive in hostile airspace. Today, that partnership would be tested against an enemy that had the advantages of terrain, preparation, and time. Reaper 1-1, this is Wolfpack Actual. The radio finally crackled to life as they approached the target area. The voice sounded strained, more urgent than before. Situation is deteriorating rapidly. We have multiple wounded and are running low on ammunition. Enemy forces appear to be massing for a final assault. Request immediate close air support over. Reaper felt her jaw tighten as she processed the implications. A final assault meant the enemy commander had calculated that American forces were sufficiently weakened to risk a direct attack, rather than continuing the siege from prepared positions. It also meant that time had officially run out for a careful, methodical approach to the problem. Wolfpack Actual, this is Reaper 1-1, she responded, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that had reassured countless ground forces over the years. 2 A-10s inbound to your position. Estimated time on station, 12 minutes. Can you mark your position for identification? Reaper 1-1, Wolfpack Actual. We are marking position with infrared strobes and have purple smoke ready for visual confirmation. Be advised, enemy positions are danger close to our location. Repeat, danger close. Danger close. The phrase every close air support pilot dreaded and trained for in equal measure. It meant friendly, and enemy forces were so intermingled that weapons employment carried significant risk of fratricide, killing the very people she was trying to save. It was the kind of situation that separated adequate pilots from exceptional ones, requiring split-second decisions based on incomplete information while flying at 300 miles per hour through hostile fire. The mountains of the Korangal Valley began to resolve themselves through the morning haze, their slopes painted in shades of brown and gray that spoke to the harsh beauty of Afghanistan's landscape. Somewhere in those peaks, 381 Americans were fighting for their lives, waiting for salvation that was still 8 minutes away. As they approached the target area, Reaper began her descent from altitude, trading the safety of height for the tactical advantage of a better view of the battlefield. The A-10's design philosophy centered around close air support missions, and that meant getting low enough to see the whites of everyone's eyes, friendly and enemy alike. It was dangerous, uncomfortable, and absolutely necessary for the kind of precision required when danger close became the operating parameter. Viper 1-2, Reaper 1-1, she called to Morrison over their tactical frequency. I'm going to take high cover while you make the initial reconnaissance pass. We need to identify friendly positions before we start putting rounds downrange. Reaper 1-1, Viper 1-2 copies, making reconnaissance pass at Angels 2. Morrison's aircraft peeled away from formation, beginning a careful descent that would take him low enough to visually confirm the positions of both friendly and enemy forces, while remaining high enough to avoid most small arms fire. The valley spread out below them like a tactical nightmare made real. Steep ridgelines provided perfect cover for enemy positions, while the valley floor offered minimal concealment for the American forces trapped in the kill zone. Smoke rose from multiple locations, marking either impact points from enemy fire or the desperate attempts of friendly forces to conceal their movements. Through her binoculars, Reaper could make out the distinctive strobing pattern of infrared markers, pinpoints of hope in a landscape that seemed designed for despair. Reaper 1-1, Viper 1-2, Morrison's voice came through the headset with clinical precision. I have visual confirmation of friendly positions marked by IR strobes. Count approximately 300 personnel in defensive positions along the valley floor. Enemy muzzle flashes observed on ridgelines north, south, and west of friendly positions. This is a classic L-shaped ambush with elevated firing positions. An L-shaped ambush. The tactical manual description seemed inadequate for what she was seeing through her own optics as she circled overhead. Enemy forces had positioned themselves to create interlocking fields of fire that would make movement in any direction potentially suicidal for the trapped Americans. It was the kind of carefully planned operation that spoke to significant intelligence preparation and tactical sophistication, not the work of opportunistic insurgents, but professional soldiers who understood the principles of terrain, time, and firepower. The radio crackled with increasing urgency. Any station, this is Wolfpack Actual. We are taking sustained fire from multiple directions. Casualties are mounting. Request immediate fire support over. 381 souls had become. Casualties are mounting. The clinical military language couldn't disguise the human reality unfolding in the valley below. American sons and daughters, husbands and wives, fathers and mothers bleeding into the Afghan dirt while she flew in circles overhead, trying to solve a tactical puzzle that seemed designed to be unsolvable. Wolfpack Actual, this is Reaper 1-1, she responded, her voice carrying the kind of steady confidence that had reassured countless ground units over the years. I have your position marked and am beginning target identification. Maintain defensive positions and be prepared to mark targets with smoke on my command. But even as she spoke the reassuring words, Reaper knew that the situation on the ground was far more complex than anything she had encountered in her previous 67 combat missions. The enemy positions were not only well concealed and tactically sound, but they were also positioned in such a way that engaging them with the A-10's primary weapon systems would require flying directly through overlapping fields of anti-aircraft fire from multiple directions. The valley had become a killing field designed to claim not just the American forces on the ground, but any aircraft foolish enough to attempt their rescue. Through her heads-up display, Reaper could see the thermal signatures that marked enemy positions scattered across the ridgelines like malevolent stars. Each signature represented fighters armed with weapons capable of bringing down low-flying aircraft, and they were positioned with the kind of tactical sophistication that suggested significant military training. This wasn't a hastily organized ambush. It was a carefully orchestrated trap designed to maximize American casualties while minimizing enemy exposure. Viper 1-2, Reaper 1-1, she called to Morrison, who was maintaining high orbit while she studied the tactical situation. I'm seeing at least 15 confirmed enemy positions with probable anti-aircraft capabilities. They've got overlapping fields of fire covering any approach route to the friendly position. Morrison's response carried the weight of shared understanding. Reaper 1-1, Viper 1-2. Confirmed. This looks like a textbook integrated air defense network. Someone down there knows exactly what they're doing. The implications were sobering. Fighting poorly trained insurgents was one thing. Engaging professional soldiers who understood air defense tactics was something else entirely. The enemy had positioned themselves not just to massacre the American forces on the ground, but to destroy any aircraft that attempted to interfere with their methodical execution of the trap. Below, the radio continued to crackle with increasingly desperate calls for assistance. Reaper 1-1, Wolfpack Actual, we are being overrun on the eastern perimeter. Request immediate fire support on grid coordinates. The transmission cut off in a burst of static that could have been equipment failure or something far worse. Reaper felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized that conventional close air support tactics would result in her own destruction long before she could effectively engage the enemy positions. The A-10 was built to survive ground fire, but it wasn't invincible, and the enemy had clearly planned for the arrival of close air support aircraft. Every approach vector was covered by multiple weapon systems, creating a gauntlet that would challenge even the most experienced pilot. But 381 Americans didn't have time for her to develop an elaborate tactical solution. They needed immediate relief, and that meant accepting risks that no rational pilot would consider under normal circumstances. The problem was that nothing about this situation qualified as normal. It was a tactical nightmare that required solutions not found in any manual or training program. Viper 1-2, I'm going to try something that's either brilliant or suicidal, she announced over the radio, her voice carrying the kind of calm that often preceded the most dangerous decisions. I need you to maintain high cover and be prepared to prosecute any targets of opportunity while I draw their attention. Morrison's response was immediate and predictable. Negative, Reaper 1-1. Whatever you're thinking, we do it together. That's how we've always operated. But Reaper was already pushing her A-10 into a steep dive toward the valley floor, trading altitude for speed and surprise. The aircraft responded with the kind of mechanical precision that had made it legendary among ground forces worldwide, its control surfaces automatically adjusting to maintain stability as she pushed the envelope of its performance capabilities. This wasn't going to be a textbook close air support mission. It was going to be something that had never been attempted before. As she dove toward the killing field below, Reaper found herself thinking about the call sign that had defined her career. Today, she would either earn it in a way that would be remembered for decades, or die trying to live up to the reputation it represented. The enemy positions erupted in muzzle flashes as they detected her approach, filling the air with tracer rounds that painted deadly patterns against the morning sky. The A-10's titanium bathtub absorbed the impact of small arms fire with metallic pings that sounded like deadly hail against the cockpit. But Reaper maintained her dive angle with the kind of focused determination that separated the living from the dead in aerial combat. At 500 feet above the valley floor, she leveled off and began her gun run, the massive GAU-8 cannon spooling up with a sound like the world's largest chainsaw. The weapon's distinctive BRRRT echoed off the valley walls as she walked depleted uranium rounds across the first enemy position, watching through her targeting pod as the carefully prepared defensive position simply ceased to exist under the withering fire. Reaper 1-1, good hits on the northern ridgeline. Morrison's voice came through her headset as she pulled up from the gun run, trading speed for altitude while enemy fire tracked her movement through the sky. I have secondary explosions and no further movement from that position. But one position down meant 14 more to go, and the enemy was now fully alert to the presence of close air support aircraft. The valley floor erupted in anti-aircraft fire as every enemy position opened up simultaneously, creating a web of tracers that made further low-level attacks seem like an exercise in assisted suicide. The tactical situation had not improved. If anything, it had become more dangerous as the enemy revealed the full extent of their air defense capabilities. The radio crackled with an update from the ground. Reaper 1-1, Wolfpack actual. Good effects on target, but we're still taking heavy fire from multiple positions. We've got approximately 40 minutes of ammunition remaining at current expenditure rate. 40 minutes. The mathematics were simple and terrifying. If the current tactical situation continued unchanged, American forces would run out of ammunition and be overrun in less than an hour. That meant she had to find a way to neutralize 14 remaining enemy positions while avoiding destruction from an integrated air defense network that had been specifically designed to kill aircraft like hers. As she climbed back to a safer altitude, Reaper's mind raced through tactical options that seemed increasingly desperate. The enemy had prepared for conventional close air support tactics, but perhaps they hadn't prepared for something so unconventional that it bordered on insane. The A-10 was built to survive punishment, and its design philosophy emphasized the ability to continue fighting even after sustaining significant damage. Today, she would test those design parameters to their absolute limits. Viper 1-2, Reaper 1-1, she called to Morrison, her voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that preceded the most dangerous decisions. I need you to take high orbit and coordinate with friendly forces for target marking. I'm going to try something that's going to look like I've completely lost my mind. Morrison's response carried equal parts concern and professional trust. Reaper 1-1, Viper 1-2. I've seen you work miracles before. What do you need? What she needed was a way to neutralize an entire network of enemy positions, while surviving concentrated anti-aircraft fire from multiple directions. What she needed was to rewrite the tactical manual in real time, while flying at 300 miles per hour through hostile airspace. What she needed was a miracle disguised as piloting skill, wrapped in enough audacity to make it work. "I'm going to take it down to the deck," she announced, beginning another descent toward the valley floor. Full afterburner, terrain masking, and gun runs from multiple vectors. The idea is to move too fast and too low for them to track effectively while hitting every position in sequence. The plan was either brilliant or completely insane, possibly both. By flying at extreme low altitude and maximum speed, she would trade safety for the element of surprise, using the valley's terrain to mask her approach until the last possible second. The A-10's cannon would provide the precision necessary to eliminate enemy positions without endangering friendly forces, while its armored cockpit would hopefully absorb the inevitable counterfire. As she dove back toward the valley floor, Reaper could see the muzzle flashes erupting from enemy positions like deadly fireflies in the morning light. Each flash represented someone trying to kill her, and collectively, they created a gauntlet that would test every aspect of her training, experience, and raw piloting ability. The A-10 responded to her control inputs with mechanical precision, its engines roaring as she pushed the throttles to military power and began what would either be remembered as the most successful close air support mission in Air Force history or the most spectacular failure. The valley walls flashed past her wingtips at a speed that made tactical thinking nearly impossible, requiring her to operate on pure instinct and muscle memory developed through hundreds of hours in the cockpit. Enemy fire tracked her movement through the canyon, but her speed and the terrain masking effect made accurate shooting nearly impossible for the defenders. She was committed now. There would be no turning back until every enemy position was neutralized or her aircraft was burning, wreckage scattered across the valley floor. "Reaper 1-1, this is Wolfpack Actual," came the call from the ground forces as she flashed overhead at barely 50 feet altitude. "We see you inbound. You are cleared hot on all marked targets. Godspeed." The massive GAU-8 cannon spun up again as she acquired her next target, the weapon's 30 depleted uranium rounds finding their mark with deadly precision. Another enemy position simply vanished under the concentrated fire, its occupants never knowing what had hit them. But 12 more positions remained, and the enemy was adapting to her tactics with the kind of professional competence that made them truly dangerous adversaries. As she pulled up from the second gun run, anti-aircraft tracers filled the air around her aircraft like deadly Christmas lights, some passing close enough that she could see their glow through the cockpit glass. The A-10's armored structure absorbed multiple hits with metallic impacts that sounded like a hammer striking an anvil, but the aircraft continued to respond to her control inputs with the kind of mechanical reliability that had made it legendary. "Viper 1-2, Reaper 1-1, she called as she climbed back to attack altitude. "I'm showing green across all systems despite taking multiple hits, continuing the attack." Morrison's voice carried professional admiration mixed with concern. "Reaper 1-1, Viper 1-2, outstanding work, but you're flying through a wall of tracers down there. How much more punishment can you take?" It was a question that would be answered in the next few minutes as she lined up for her third gun run. The enemy had now revealed the full extent of their anti-aircraft capabilities, and the volume of fire being directed skyward was unlike anything she had encountered in her previous combat experience. But 12 enemy positions still threatened the American forces on the ground, and 40 minutes of ammunition was becoming 35 minutes with each passing moment. The A-10 dove toward the valley floor once again, its pilot committed to a course of action that would either save 381 American lives or add her own name to the casualty reports that would be filed in the aftermath of this disaster. Either way, she had made her choice, and there would be no turning back until the mission was complete. Time compressed into a series of violent snapshots as Reaper continued her one-woman war against the enemy positions scattered throughout the valley. Gun run after gun run, each approach bringing new damage to her aircraft as enemy fire found its mark with increasing accuracy. The A-10's cockpit displays flickered and sparked as electronic systems absorbed punishment from near misses. But the aircraft's fundamental mechanical systems continued to respond with the kind of reliability that justified its reputation for survivability. Reaper 1-1, you've got smoke trailing from your right engine. Morrison's voice cut through the combat fog with urgent precision. Recommend you break off and egress for emergency landing. But breaking off meant abandoning the American forces on the ground to their fate, and Reaper had never left soldiers behind in her entire career. The right engine was running rough, hydraulic pressure was dropping on the secondary system, and her heads-up display was showing caution lights that would normally require immediate attention. But 8 enemy positions remained active, and the ground forces were still taking effective fire from multiple directions. Negative, Viper 1-2, she responded, her voice steady despite the aircraft shaking around her as she lined up for another attack run. I can make it work. 8 more positions to neutralize. The 4th gun run took her directly through the heart of the enemy's air defense network, tracers and rocket-propelled grenades creating a deadly light show that seemed designed more for intimidation than accuracy. The A-10's GAU-8 cannon spoke again, its distinctive sound echoing off the valley walls as another enemy position disappeared under the concentrated fire. 7 remaining. But the cumulative damage was beginning to tell. The aircraft's response to control inputs was becoming sluggish, and several critical systems were operating on backup power or manual reversion. The titanium bathtub that protected her from ground fire was scarred and dented from multiple impacts, and the right engine was definitely losing power despite her attempts to maintain optimal operating parameters. Wolfpack Actual, this is Reaper 1-1, she called to the ground forces as she climbed away from the 4th attack. Situation report on your status over. The response came immediately. Reaper 1-1, Wolfpack Actual. Outstanding effects on target. Enemy fire has decreased significantly, and we're beginning to consolidate our position. You've given us breathing room, but we still need those remaining positions neutralized before we can attempt movement. 7 enemy positions. The number seemed both insignificant and insurmountable given the condition of her aircraft. The A-10 was still flying, still fighting, but each additional gun run increased the probability that she would join the casualty count instead of preventing it.